The Tale of Mrs. Tiggy Winkle, written by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Leela who lived at a farm called Little Town. She was a good little girl, only she was always losing her pocket handkerchiefs. One day, little Leela came into the farmyard crying. Oh, she did cry so. I have lost my pocket hanky. 3 hankies and an apron. Have you seen them, Tabby Kitten? The kitten went on washing her white paws. So Leela asked a speckled hen, Sally Henny Penny, have you found 3 pocket hankies? But the speckled hen ran into a barn, chuckling, I go barefoot, barefoot, barefoot. And then Leela asked Rooster Robin, sitting on a twig. Rooster Robin looked sideways at Leela with his bright black eye and flew over a stile and away. Leela climbed upon the stile and looked up at the hill behind Little Town. A hill that goes up, up into the clouds as though it had no top. And a great way up the hillside, she thought she saw some white things spread upon the grass. Leela scrambled up the hill as fast as her little legs would carry her. She ran along a steep pathway, up and up, until Little Town was right away down below. She could have dropped a pebble down the chimney. There she came to a spring bubbling out from the hillside. Someone had stood a tin can upon a stone to catch the water, but the water was already running over, for the can was no bigger than an egg cup. And where the sand upon the path was wet, there were footmarks of a very small person. Leela ran on and on. The path ended under a big rock. The grass was short and green, and there were clothes props cut from fern stems, with lines of plaited rushes and a heap of tiny cloth pins, but no pocket handkerchiefs. But there was something else, a door straight into the hill, and inside it someone was singing, Lily white and clean, with little frills between, smooth and hot, red rusty spot, never here be seen. Leela knocked once, twice, and interrupted the song. A little frightened voice called out, Who is that? Leela opened the door, and what do you think there was inside the hill? A nice clean kitchen with a flagged floor and wooden beams, just like any other farm kitchen. Only the roof was so low that Leela's head nearly touched it, and the pots and pans were small, and so was everything there. There was a nice hot singy smell, and at the table, with an iron in her hand, stood a very stout, short person staring anxiously at Leela. Her print gown was tucked up, and she was wearing a large apron over her stripped petticoat. Her little black nose went sniffle, sniffle, snuffle, and her eyes went twinkle, twinkle. And underneath her cap, where Leela had yellow curls, that little person had prickles. "Who are you?" said Leela. "Have you seen my pocket hankies?" The little person made a bob courtesy. "Oh, yes, if you please. My name is Mrs. Tiggy Winkle. Oh, yes, if you please. I am in excellent clear stature." And she took something out of a clothes basket and spread it on the ironing blanket. "What is that thing?" said Leela. "That is not my pocket hanky." "Oh, no, if you please. That is a little red waistcoat belonging to Rooster Robin." And then she ironed it and folded it and put it on one side. Then she took something else off a clothes horse. "That isn't my apron," said Leela. "Oh, no, if you please. That is a tablecloth belonging to Jenny Wren. Look how it is stained with currant juice. Oh, it's very bad to wash," said Mrs. Tiggy Winkle. Mrs. Tiggy Winkle's nose went sniffle, sniffle, snuffle, and her eyes went twinkle, twinkle, and she fetched another hot iron from the fire. "There is one of my pocket hankies," cried Leela. And there's my apron." Mrs. Tiggy Winkle ironed it and goffered it and shook out the frills. "Oh, that is lovely," said Leela. "And what are those long yellow things with fingers like gloves?" That is a pair of stockings belonging to Sally Hennypenny. Look how she has worn the heels out with scratching in the yard. She will very soon go barefoot," said Mrs. Tiggy Winkle. "Why, there's another hanky, but it isn't mine. It is red." "Oh, no, if you please. That belongs to old Mrs. Rabbit, and it did so smell of onions. I have had to wash it repeatedly. I can't get out the smell." "There is another one of mine," said Leela. "What are those funny little white things?" "That's a pair of mittens belonging to Tabby Kitten. I only have to iron them. She washes them herself." "There is my last pocket hanky," said Leela. "And what are you dipping into the basin of starch?" "They are little shirt fronts belonging to Tom Timhouse. Most terrible particular," said Mrs. Tiggy Winkle. "Now I have finished my ironing. I'm going to air some clothes." "What are these dear, soft, fluffy things?" said Leela. "Oh, those are woolly coats belonging to the little lambs." "Will their jackets take off?" asked Leela. "Oh, yes, if you please. Look at the sheep mark on the shoulder. They're always marked at washing," said Mrs. Tiggy Winkle. And she hung up all sorts and sizes of clothes, small brown coats of mice, and one velvety black moleskin waistcoat, and a red tailcoat with no tail belonging to Squirrel Nutkin, and a very much shrunk blue jacket belonging to Peter Rabbit, and a petticoat not marked that had gone lost in the washing. And at last the basket was empty. Then Mrs. Tiggy Winkle made tea, a cup for herself and a cup for Leela. They sat before the fire on a bench and looked sideways at one another. Mrs. Tiggy Winkle's hand holding the teacup was very, very brown and very, very wrinkly with the soap suds, and all through her gown and her cap there were hairpins sticking wrong end out, because of that, Leela did not like to sit too near to her. When they had finished tea, they tied up the clothes in bundles, and Leela's pocket handkerchiefs were folded up inside her clean apron and fastened with a silver safety pin. And then they made up the fire with the turf and came out and locked the door and hid the key under the doorsill. Then away down the hill trotted Leela and Mrs. Tiggy Winkle with the bundles of clothes. All the way down the path, little animals came out of the fern to meet them. The very first that they met were Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny, and she gave them their nice clean clothes, and all the little animals and birds were so very much obliged to dear Mrs. Tiggy Winkle. So that at the bottom of the hill, when they came to the stile, there was nothing left to carry except Leela's little bundle. Leela scrambled up the stile with the bundle in her hand, and then she turned to say good night and to thank the washerwoman. But what a very odd thing happened! Mrs. Tiggy Winkle had not waited either for thanks or for the washing bill. She was running up the hill. And where was her white frilled cap? And her shawl? And her gown? And her petticoat? And how small she had grown, and how brown and covered with prickles! Why, Mrs. Tiggy Winkle was nothing but a hedgehog. Now, some people say that little Leela had been asleep upon the stile, but then how could she have found 3 clean pocket hankies and an apron pinned with a silver safety pin? And besides, I have seen that door into the back of the hill called Cat Bill's, and besides, I am very well acquainted with dear Mrs. Tiggy Winkle.